In this world, horrific monsters called kaiju can attack at any time, destroying dozens of city blocks in an instant. To fight these monsters, the military has formed these specialized task forces to handle situations like these. So after issuing an evacuation order and making sure all the surviving citizens have made it to safety, they are given the all-clear to engage with the monster. The whole incident is being broadcast live, so everyone who is not in the danger zone is watching in anticipation to see how the task force takes down this monster. They send in Division 3, and these guys do not play around. As soon as the monster gets distracted for a second, they immediately open fire on its guts and draw its attention by jumping all over the place. But once the prep is completed, one member fires a rail gun at the monster, cutting a hole straight through its chest and causing it to explode from the inside out. Now that the worst of it is over, we get a look at the aftermath of the incident and the poor fellas whose job it is to clean kaiju guts out of the city streets. The 3rd Division receives a lot of cheers from the people whom they have saved with their quick response time, but none of that praise is ever going to be going towards Kafka or his team. And that's because their job only starts after the fighting is already over. No one cares about their work and they get no thanks for their efforts, but it's a necessary job, so Kafka is happy to get it done. As he is hacking away at the kaiju meat, a drone comes over to him saying the research department wants a sample of the monster, so he puts some of it in a test tube and puts it in the drone. On the ground, a member of Kafka's team makes the mistake of hoisting up some of the guts of the monster, and despite Kafka warning him not to do it, it was already too late as he has acid sprayed on his body. It burns straight through his suit, but Kafka knows how to treat the wound since he has had something similar happen to him before, so he is sure his teammate will be fine. Kafka takes a moment to look at the workload they still got left to do, and he has no idea how they expect him to be able to completely remove this thing in less than a week. The team manager comes up to Kafka and tells him he is being transferred to clear another section of the monster, but it's the intestines, so Kafka wants nothing to do with it. Yet he gets dragged away anyway. After a long day of dealing with monster shit, Kafka returns home, but he can still smell the doo-doo up in his nose. He grabs a tissue to try to get rid of the smell, and he then notices a news report about the kaiju incident and the captain of the 3rd Division who took it down. Mina Ashiro. Not only did she manage to become the captain of her division in a relatively short time, but she is also credited with taking down hundreds of kaiju. It seems like Kafka has known Mura since childhood, as they made a promise to get rid of all kaiju together, but with how things have turned out, Kafka is left wondering how he ended up on the sidelines like this. He tries not to think about it because he'll feel like a failure otherwise, but cleaning up kaiju shit is an important job as well, so he tries to convince himself that he's important as well. The next day, Kafka heads into work in a bad mood, and once he gets there, he is called over by one of his co-workers who wants to introduce him to the new part-time worker. His name is Ichikawa, and he says he is determined to join the defense force one day, but the others laugh at him and say Kafka had the same dream years ago, but he eventually gave up on all that and settled into his role of clearing out kaiju parts. He is saying all this to praise Kafka, but it's just delivering bonus damage to his already fragile sense of pride. Ichikawa asks him why he chose to give up on his dream, but Kafka doesn't really have an answer for him. He just realized that his abilities were limited, so he couldn't bring himself to continue trying when he didn't have confidence in himself. Even though he knows it's a sad way to look at things, he tries to laugh it off and says Ichikawa will understand when he gets older, but Ichikawa refuses to accept Kafka's depressing way of life. When they are getting assigned their work positions for the day, Ichikawa gets assigned to the intestines, so Kafka starts doing a victory dance as payback for making him feel like a failure this morning. But then Kafka also gets assigned to the intestines again, meaning another long and disgusting day of handling kaiju shit. By the time it's their lunch break, Ichikawa is completely wiped out by the stench he had to endure, and the same goes for Kafka as well. He looks over and notices that Ichikawa only brought one bento box for lunch today. While it's understandable that he wouldn't have much of an appetite after what he went through, he still needs to get proper nutrition, so Kafka tosses him a vitamin packet, otherwise he won't be able to last through the rest of the day. Ichikawa initially wants to refuse it, but Kafka insists he take it, as well as these nose plugs which he says will make the intestine work at least somewhat bearable. Ichikawa is still being stubborn about listening to Kafka, so he stops asking and forcefully shoves them up his nose. Afterwards, they continue their kaiju cleaning till the end of the day. Once they can finally start packing up for the day, the others head out first while Kafka goes over the checklist of things they've done today, and he's glad the intestines are finally done, so he won't be needing to do that horrible work anymore. As he is still looking over the things they've done, Ichikawa approaches him from behind, so Kafka jokingly asks if he's coming back for revenge after he had nose plugs shoved up his nose. But on the contrary, Ichikawa is actually really grateful for what Kafka did to help him. It was thanks to his kindness that Ichikawa was able to make it through a whole day on the intestines, so he wants to show his appreciation. That's all he had to say, but as he is walking away, he turns back and tells Kafka that the age limit on recruiting for the Defense Force was raised to 33 due to the declining birth rates, so Kafka is within the eligibility criteria now. Ichikawa knows he has no right to question the life choices of others, but he could tell that when Kafka talked about giving up on his dream of joining the Defense Force, he looks sad. With that being said, Ichikawa doesn't care what Kafka decides to do, so he can choose to ignore what he just told him and continue his life as he normally would. Kafka thanks Ichikawa for looking out for him even though they only met today, but as Ichikawa turns around to respond, this fricker pops out of the ground and is about to chomp down on him. However, before we can lose Ichikawa to the monster, Kafka somehow manages to close the distance in half a second and push him out of the way. Ichikawa is surprised by the feat Kafka was able to just pull off, but they aren't out of the woods yet since the monster attacks again and Kafka is forced to kick him out of the way. He yells at Ichikawa to run away from here as fast as possible so he can call the defense courts to come handle this, but Ichikawa doesn't want to leave him behind to handle a monster like this on his own. Kafka doesn't think he has what it takes to take the monster down by himself, but he also knows Ichikawa being here isn't going to help at all. He's still young and has his dream of joining the defense corps, so he can't let himself be killed here like this. Ichikawa doesn't like it, but he has no other choice but to leave Kafka behind, so he starts running off and Kafka draws the kaiju's attention in the other direction. It begins chasing him and Kafka is running for his life, and he's moving really well for someone who gave up on his dreams. He finds a doorway into a building and thinks he can use it to escape the kaiju, so he runs inside while the kaiju gets stuck at the door, allowing him to create some much-needed distance and jump through a window to get out of there. This leads him to have a flashback of his younger days right after his hometown got destroyed by a kaiju attack. Both his and Mina's homes and school were destroyed, but what had him the most upset at the time was that he lost his holographic Charizard Pokemon card in the chaos. Mina was upset that her favorite cat ended up dying. They both decided that they wanted to become Defense Force officers, so Kafka made it a competition to see who could become the coolest officer between the two of them, and then they'll eliminate kaiju together. Back to the present, Kafka lands on the ground and continues running after he gets up from the ground. He doesn't know how he let things get so off track after he made that promise with Mina, but he's got to survive this kaiju first before he can think about that. He can't outrun it any longer, so he picks up a pipe and prepares to take a stand. But despite knowing that he needs to target its legs first, Kafka is frozen in fear and gets knocked out by the kaiju. He then has his leg crushed by the monster's hand, and with him now unable to move, it lowers its head so it can eat him whole. However, before Kafka is killed, Ichikawa shows back up and knocks the monster's jaw away. Kafka yells at him for putting himself in danger like this, but Ichikawa says he already notified the defense force. However, that doesn't mean he is just going to abandon a friend in trouble, especially one that is badly injured. If he did something like that, then he wouldn't have the right to ever call himself a defense force officer. Kafka realizes that he has always failed to protect the things around him. Even now, he is failing to protect his junior who's about to get squished. Just then, the tiger comes out of nowhere and tackles the kaiju's hand before several blasts are sent towards the monster, carving it up before a final blast blows out its back. This was the work of Mina and her squad, but she doesn't spare a second for Kafka as she hands his care over to some of her subordinates and heads off to go clear the area of any remaining monsters. Later, Kafka is in the hospital and thinking about how amazing Mina is and how she's gotten to a level where he can't reach her anymore, but he gets startled when Ichikawa, who is in the next bed, starts talking to him. He thanks him because if he hadn't saved him when the monster first arrived, or hadn't gotten Ichikawa to run and inform the defense force, then he would have certainly died in that battle. So as far as Ichikawa is concerned, Kafka is really cool. He really thinks he would make a great defense force officer, but that's still his own choice to make. Hearing this from Ichikawa, that helps Kafka make up his mind to try to join the defense force once more, but then he notices this freaky thing just flying over his head, and before he can even yell, it has already forced its way down into his throat. He begins squirming in pain, but by the time Ichikawa is able to check on him, he has already turned into a kaiju monster. They are both dumbfounded to find that Kafka's appearance has changed, but Kafka tells Ichikawa to calm down since he is still the same person on the inside. However, this old man doesn't seem to care and immediately calls the defense force to have Kafka eliminated. Elsewhere, Mina is having a flashback to the days when she and Kafka would spend time working on their kaiju slaying tactics. She found it really scary to have to fight something that would be several times her own size, but Kafka reassured her that he would always be by her side to help her through it. However, that was a freaking lie. She gets out of the bathtub and answers a call about the kaiju incident report at the hospital, and she says she will be there to handle the situation shortly. After getting ready, Mina addresses her team and informs them of the situation. A kaiju has been spotted in the hospital, so it's their job to make sure it is taken down without causing harm to the people. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Kafka and Ichikawa are still freaking out. They try to show the old man that this is all just one big misunderstanding by making Kafka look as non-threatening as possible, but that's pretty hard to do when he's got a face that looks like that. The old man dies of a heart attack shortly after, and as Kafka goes to try and check up on him, he puts his hand on the wall and completely shatters it without meaning to. He can't believe this is happening to him. But the commotion has attracted the attention of several hospital patients, so since the defense force is probably already in their way, Ichikawa suggests that Kafka leaves. He agrees that him being here would only cause problems for the people, but as he goes to try and open the window, he forgot about his inhuman strength and caused more property damage again. Brushing that aside, Ichikawa says they should get going since the people here are starting to panic from Kafka's presence, so they both leap out of the hole in the wall and head into the city. The defense force receives word that the kaiju on the loose has fled the hospital and is now heading into the city, so they prepare to intercept it. Meanwhile, Ichikawa is running through the city streets and wondering when exactly Kafka became a kaiju, because he knows he wasn't one earlier today. He turns back to ask if Kafka is really still the same person inside, but looking at him now, even Kafka isn't sure what he is anymore. His body just started doing this weird stuff on its own, and he even ends up eating a random bird for no reason. Kafka eventually reverts to his less monstrous kaiju form, but it seems like there's another problem at hand. He now needs to pee. Ichikawa tells him to just hold it in since they don't have time for a potty break, but Kafka says the body probably isn't going to listen and she'll end up just peeing on the road. But with that said, he's got no balls right now, so Ichikawa doesn't know how he intends to pee in the first place. Then this happens. Kafka collapses on the ground out of embarrassment and wishes to erase that moment from his memory, but Ichikawa reminds him that they still got to keep moving before the defense force gets here. Speaking of which, Kafka asks if he can still join the defense force like this, but that's going to be strictly impossible since he is the very thing that the defense force is trained to kill. He'd be obliterated on sight if they found him. It's a cruel fact for Kafka because even though he finally found the motivation to try again and join the defense force, he is now permanently locked out of that skill tree because of his body. Ichikawa doesn't have any way to console him, but he finds a good place for Kafka to hide for now. But before they leave the area, Kafka's attention gets drawn by something behind them and he can tell it's not good. Ichikawa asks if it's the defense force, but it's much worse than that. It's an actual kaiju. The defense force received the news of the second kaiju attack that's happening, so they split up so they can gain control of both situations. Back in town, Kafka is somehow able to tell if the new kaiju is the same kind that attacked both him and Ichikawa that evening, so Ichikawa thinks this is the perfect opportunity for them to escape since this will divide the defense force's numbers. Since Kafka's presence already made people evacuate the area, there's a good chance that no one will die from this attack. They should just leave it up to the defense force to handle. Kafka reluctantly agrees and turns to start leaving. Meanwhile, a little girl is currently being traumatized since her family did not evacuate and her mother had been pinned under a dresser in all the chaos. The girl's mother urges her to leave before she gets herself killed, but the little girl insists on trying to save her mother. Unfortunately, all this gets her is another dose of nightmare fuel as the kaiju is closed in on them and busts into the room to eat. It opens its mouth wide to take a bite out of the little girl, but at the last second, the girl is saved by an elbow strike from Kafka. The strike sends the kaiju flying several blocks away and Kafka is left amazed by how strong his new body is, but then he remembers that there are people in trouble, so he turns to the girl and asks if she's okay. The girl is obviously frightened by him and Kafka's creepy smile isn't helping his case, but when Ichikawa arrives, the girl calms down as they finally free her mother. The mother is unconscious, but Ichikawa assures the girl that her mother is going to be fine once they get her to safety. The Kaiju returns, so Kafka tells Ichikawa to get the girl and woman out of here as soon as possible while he stays behind because he wants to pick this Kaiju as hard as he can. Ichikawa sees the lightning coming from Kafka and immediately realizes that he wants no part in what's about to happen, so he hurriedly leaves while Kafka lines up for the most powerful uppercut he has ever given. The Kaiju is hit with such force that it is sent flying, and soon after it explodes from the inside out, covering everything around it in Kaiju guts. Kafka is left stunned because he really just took out a giant Kaiju in one punch, but no matter how cool he may look after his victory, to normal people, he is still just a terrifying Kaiju. He approaches the girl and tells her the defense force is going to be here soon to help her and she doesn't have to be scared anymore since he'll leave now. But as he is walking away, the girl overcomes her fear of him enough to call out and thank him for saving her and her mother. After hearing those magical words, Kafka is sent into a flashback of the time he spent with Mina trying to become a member of the defense force. And even with his current predicament, maybe there's still hope for his dream. Ichikawa calls out to Kafka and tells him that he has called for an ambulance, so they should leave before anyone gets here. Kafka turns to him after giving it some thought and declares that he isn't going to give up on his dream of joining the defense force because he promised to stand by Mina's side. A while later, Mina arrives at the incident site, but the whole team is shocked to find that the Kaiju has already been defeated. She approaches the little girl and asks to find out what happened here. But when the girl attempts to retell the story, she nearly starts crying from all the trauma. Mina assures the girl that she doesn't need to be scared because she as well as the entire defense force are going to wipe all the Kaiju off the face of the earth. The girl is happy to hear this at first, but then she thinks about it for a second and asks Mina to promise not to hurt the good Kaiju guy. She says the good Kaiju is the one who saved her mother and killed the other Kaiju, but Mina is still shocked by the words good and Kaiju being used in the same sentence. On the morning news, a portrait of Kafka's Kaiju form is created from eyewitness reports, and it is dubbed Kaiju number 8. It is the 8th Kaiju to ever receive a code name, since the defense force is yet to track it down. The cleanup crew wonders why the defense force hasn't found it yet, and as they talk amongst themselves, Ichikawa walks into the room and sheds a little light on what has transpired thus far. It has been 3 months since Kafka became the first Kaiju to successfully escape from the defense force, so officers are dumping a lot of the defense budget into tracking him down. The shift lead tells Ichikawa that something came in the mail for both him and Kafka, so since Kafka already went out early to begin working, he wants Ichikawa to take his to him. The other guys already know what the mail is about, as Kafka used to apply to the defense force every single year, and every year he'd be rejected so the team would have to cheer him up. Ichikawa takes a look at his results and is delighted to find out that he passed successfully, so he heads off to go give Kafka his results as well. As he was leaving, he stopped for a moment and took a look at Kafka's results himself just to be sure he wasn't going to hand a letter of disappointment to him. But after looking at it, he happily continued running. It looks like Kafka managed to pass the test this time around, and all the guys are happy for him since they know how badly he wanted it. Ichikawa makes it to Kafka and tells him that he actually passed the first round of the exams this time, but as Kafka turns around from eating his lunch, Ichikawa sees that he is letting his Kaiju form show. Kafka hadn't realized he was in Kaiju form and could have really exposed himself if it was anyone other than Ichikawa just now. So he tries to make himself go back to normal, but accidentally leaves his mouth unchanged. Ichikawa gives him an earful about how dangerous it would be for him to get spotted since there are still new stories about him. Both of them had managed to avoid suspicion by claiming they had run away after the Kaiju attacked, but while they fooled everyone back then, if Kafka keeps acting like this, he's going to get exposed sooner or later. Ichikawa hands his results over to him. But while Kafka is still happy, he isn't nearly as happy as Ichikawa thought he would be. This is mainly because Kafka only ever failed at the second stage of the test, so the hard part is yet to come for him. While they are on that topic, Ichikawa asks if Kafka really intends to take the exam with his body the way it is. The first exam was easy enough to take since it was just a written test, but the second one is going to have officers all over the place, and they kill him on sight if they found out about his body. Even with the risk, Kafka is still determined to take the exam. Over the past 3 months, he has been trying to find a way to turn back into a human completely, but he hasn't had any luck yet. However, with the age limit, this is his last chance to actually apply, so he has to take a chance. Ichikawa understands his determination, but he makes it clear that if something happens to Kafka, then he's on his own because if they are taking this test together, it's going to be as rivals. Kafka reaches down to grab his water bottle, but when he has a little trouble opening the cap, he accidentally transforms into his kaiju form and breaks the bottle. Ichikawa takes back everything he just said and tells Kafka to drop out of the exam because he is going to get himself killed, but Kafka still really wants to do it. Ichikawa relents, but reiterates that he is on his own if anything happens during the exam. Everyone else is going to be here soon to start work, so he tells Kafka to get a grip on his transformation. Once Ichikawa leaves, Kafka reveals that he was really relieved that he passed since he wouldn't know what to do if Ichikawa passed and he didn't, but now he's got to get ready for the test. On the day of the test, Kafka and Ichikawa arrive in the parking lot of the Defense Force and Ichikawa is utterly amazed by the huge building he sees before him. He's been to a base before on a field trip, but this one is way bigger than anything he has ever seen. Kafka explains that they share this area with a special Defense Force garrison, so when something happens, both sides work together to handle it quickly. So in other words, if Kafka accidentally transforms here, he would be dead within seconds. Other examinees begin arriving as well, so Kafka doesn't see any point in letting himself get scared by it anymore. He tells Ichikawa that they should probably head inside soon, but he is interrupted by a rude girl who calls him an old man. Kafka defends himself, saying that he is only 32, so he isn't that old. But even Ichikawa thinks he is old, so he just has to accept it. His age aside, the girl bluntly tells him to move his car, even though there are many spots available elsewhere, just because she thinks she has a right to it, since 5 is her lucky number. Kafka obviously isn't going to budge for a dumb reason like that, so the girl takes matters into her own hands and prepares to abuse the fact that she is probably rich. She takes off her clothes, revealing that she is wearing the kind of battle suit the Defense Force people wear, but she isn't going to be using it for such a noble cause as fighting kaiju. Instead, she picks up Kafka's car with one hand and tosses it out of the spot, which she probably thinks makes her cool, but it just makes her a bitch. However, being a big shot apparently gives her the right to do stuff like this and get away with it, as she introduces herself as Kakoru Shinomiya, and she says she kills kaiju for fun. And coincidentally, she finds it weird that Kafka smells like a kaiju. This was the end of episode 2. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part.